They say the gods spoke in symbols, but what happens when one of those symbols is alive, walking beside you, wagging its tail? Across the sands of time, one name echoes through the halls of mystery: Thoth, the Atlantean sage, keeper of divine mathematics, master of the written word, and guardian of the balance between the seen and the unseen. His prophecies have baffled scholars, priests, and occultists for millennia, but buried in the labyrinth of his teachings lies an obscure and haunting prediction, one about dogs. Not as mere companions. Not as the loyal pets we know today. But as watchers, messengers, heralds of change. In the Emerald Tablets, Thoth speaks of a time when the creatures closest to man will begin to bear the weight of man's shadow. When their eyes will see beyond the veil, and their actions will signal a great turning of the age. For centuries, these words were dismissed, filed away as poetic metaphor. But now, subtle patterns are emerging. Unexplained behaviors. Strange illnesses. Unnatural loyalty that seems to border on psychic awareness. Dogs sensing death before it comes. Dogs warning of disasters hours before human instruments detect them. Dogs staring, unblinking, at something you cannot see. Is this simply instinct, or is it prophecy unfolding? In this video, we will journey deep into the heart of this forgotten revelation. We'll unravel why Thoth linked humanity's fate to the canine spirit, how ancient civilizations saw dogs as guardians between worlds, and why certain forces may not want you to understand their true role. We will look at startling modern evidence suggesting the prophecy is not just real, but happening right now, all around us. And before this journey ends, you may never look into a dog's eyes the same way again. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might change not only the way you see animals, but the way you see the invisible architecture of reality itself. To understand Thoth's prophecy about dogs, we must first step back into the dawn of civilization, into an age when the line between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin, and the creatures we now call animals were regarded as emissaries of the divine. In ancient Egypt, where Thoth's influence was most profound, dogs were far more than guardians of homes, they were guardians of the soul's journey. The jackal-headed god Anubis, often conflated in the esoteric tradition with Thoth's own wisdom, stood at the threshold between life and death, weighing the hearts of men. While Anubis himself was not a dog but a jackal, the symbolism extended to all canine forms, creatures who could traverse the liminal space between worlds without fear. In those days, a dog's howl was not dismissed as mere noise, it was an omen. The Egyptians believed that dogs could hear the voices of the dead and the whispering of spirits that roamed the unseen desert. When a dog stared into the distance, it was said they were watching the passage of souls. These beliefs were not unique to Egypt. The Greeks told of Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld, whose keen senses no mortal could evade. The Mayans and Aztecs spoke of dogs ferrying human spirits across the river of the afterlife, a belief echoed in the lore of indigenous North American tribes, where dogs were seen as loyal guides even after death. But it wasn't only death that linked humanity and the canine. In esoteric philosophy, the dog embodies the principle of unwavering vigilance, a living metaphor for the soul's higher awareness, which never sleeps even when the body does. Thoth, whose wisdom often cloaked itself in riddles, understood that humans easily grow blind to subtle shifts in the spiritual atmosphere. We are distracted, tethered to the noise of thought. Dogs, however, remain attuned to vibrations and movements that elude our senses. They act as sentinels, not just for the physical home, but for the psychic space in which we live. Over centuries, as empires rose and fell, this ancient understanding began to fade. In the march toward modernity, dogs were reduced in the collective imagination to companions, hunters, or tools for labor. The mystical role was forgotten, or deliberately buried. Occult historians point to the period after the fall of Alexandria's Great Library, when thousands of scrolls, including those said to hold Thoth's original prophecies, were lost or destroyed. The guardianship role of dogs survived only in fragments, folk tales, superstitions, and lingering myths scattered across continents. And yet, the symbolism persisted in secret circles. The Rosicrucians spoke of the silent hound that follows every soul, an invisible force that protects but also warns. Some Masonic traditions quietly preserve rituals involving the image of the dog as a keeper of oaths and a watcher against spiritual corruption. In these esoteric frameworks, the dog is not simply man's best friend, it is humanity's shadow sentinel, aware of what is coming before we are. Thoth's prophecy, when seen in this light, is not just about animals, it is about humanity's relationship to perception, vigilance, and the unseen architecture of reality. It hints that when the dogs begin to behave in ways that disturb the ordinary flow of life, restless at night, staring into corners, warning of invisible dangers, it is not coincidence. It is a signpost. It is the whisper of the cosmic clock moving toward a turning point. And according to ancient sources, that turning point is no longer in the distant future. The patterns are emerging now, just as Thoth said they would. Imagine standing at the edge of a dense, moonlit forest. The air is thick with the scent of moss and secrets. You hear a soft padding behind you, not the rattling footsteps of civilization, but the measured, deliberate tread of a dog. It stops, lifts its head, and fixes its gaze into the trees. For a moment you feel unsteady, as if the animal's attention reaches into a place you cannot yet name. This is the image Thoth conjures, the dog as a luminous sensor, an organ of perception grafted to the human household, tuned to frequencies our minds have long forgotten how to hear. In his metaphor-rich style, Thoth always taught through mirrors. Talk of dogs and you talk of vigilance. Speak of vigilance and you begin to understand how reality signals its shifts long before the mind can catalog them. At the heart of the prophecy lies a simple epistemological claim: perception precedes explanation. Thoth's wording suggests that the world announces its changes in subtle ways, changes that the rational mind, with its appetite for labels and metrics, often dismisses. Dogs, with sensory apparatuses honed across millennia of coevolution with humans, remain receptive. Their hearing catches infrasonic tremors that slide under the threshold of human awareness. Their noses map molecular storms of illness and decay before any thermometer or lab test will register them. Their behavior syncs to shifts in electromagnetic fields and atmospheric pressure that our instruments may miss. But Thoth frames these abilities not as mere survival tricks. He frames them as spiritual technologies, lived practices of attention that connect the animal to the unseen scaffolding of the cosmos. To grasp the deeper logic of the prophecy, consider the dog as both mirror and messenger. When a dog stares at what you cannot see, it is not only observing, it is interpreting. The animal reflects something of the human condition, our blind spots, our denied fears, our undisclosed griefs. In the myths, this reflection was ethical as much as supernatural. Animals that saw the dead or the spirits were reminding communities of moral obligations, to honor the passage of life, to bind the loose ends of unkept promises. Thoth's warning, therefore, is twofold. Dogs will signal external upheavals, ecological, atmospheric, social, and they will also reveal interior collapses, the psychic corrosion where greed, haste, and distraction hollow us out. Storytelling helps make this less abstract. Picture a small coastal village where dogs begin to howl at odd hours. Fishers notice their animals' restlessness before a sudden swell rises offshore. Or imagine a woman whose Labrador wakes and nudges her repeatedly over many nights, a prelude to a seizure the next morning. In these narratives, the dog's behavior is neither random nor purely instinctual. It reads as a timely alert, a life-preserving nudge. Thoth would have called this the watching of thresholds, a practice whereby certain beings signal that the membrane between states is thinning. The ancient sage's prophecy insists we treat these signals as data, not superstition. Yet Thoth layers complexity upon this simple idea. He speaks of dogs bearing the shadow of man's soul, a phrase that demands nuanced unpacking. The shadow suggests projection, qualities we refuse to own, fears we outsource to others. Dogs, living on the perimeter of human intention, often encounter the material residues of these projections: anxiety, unresolved grief, the psychic imprint of trauma. Thoth's prophetic lens reads such encounters as diagnostic. When canines begin to mirror collective shadow in new or intensified ways, it is a symptom of a larger cultural sickness. The prophecy thus becomes both literal and allegorical. Dogs sense the weather of the world and the weather of the heart. And yet, for all the description, Thoth intentionally leaves gaps. He teaches in riddles. To reveal everything at once would collapse the seeker's capacity to discover. So we are left with open questions that thrum like a distant bell. Are dogs acting as passive receivers of environmental data, or are they active conduits, moving information between dimensions? Is their growing sensitivity a product of modern environmental stressors, or the activation of an ancient role encoded in the weave of human-canine coevolution? And crucially, if we fail to listen, what happens when the watchmen grow tired of warning? These questions are not rhetorical whims. They are invitations to pay attention, to cultivate practices that sharpen our own senses, and to consider the possibility that Thoth's prophecy is not merely poetic allegory but an operational truth, that some forms of knowing precede our instruments, and that the dog, in its quiet, devoted way, stands ready to remind us how to remember. If Part 1 placed the dog at the threshold, then Part 2 walks us through the threshold itself, the textures, the smells, the rules that govern passage. Thoth's prophecy, when taken beyond metaphor, exposes a layered paradox. Dogs are simultaneously ordinary and uncanny, creatures of appetite and conduits of meaning. They live in our kitchens and couches yet keep faith with something vaster. This duality has confused observers for centuries. To some, canine oddities are nothing more than evolutionary refinement, heightened hearing, exquisite olfaction, and social attunement honed by thousands of years beside humans. To others, these behaviors are hints of a hidden functionality, an atavistic role encoded into the weave of human destiny by those who once spoke with the gods. Both views hold truth. The task is to thread them together without collapsing them into caricature. Begin with the little-known mechanisms often ignored by popular myth. Dogs do not experience the world as a succession of labeled objects. They live in continual flux, a tapestry of scents, microvibrations, and electromagnetic hums. Where we see a quiet living room, they read weather on the breath of air, detect the faintest tremor in the earth, and pick up the biochemical signatures of illness before symptoms bloom. Thoth's language, that dogs bear the shadow of man's soul, may point to this biochemical and energetic sensitivity. The shadow, in esoteric terms, is not merely moral failing but also the unprocessed residue of living, fear, grief, infection, and the small electromagnetic storms stirred by mass attention. Dogs register these residues and respond. Sometimes their response is protective, sometimes it is a howl that carves through the night like an alarm. Yet there is more than physiology at work. Myth and ritual have long shaped how humans interpret what canines do. In many cultures, a dog's stare is read as a message, its sudden distress as an omen. But here a crucial caution arises: anthropomorphism and projection. When a beloved pet pawed the foot of a dying farmer, the farmer's family heard prophecy. A scientist might catalog the same action as associative learning. Both narratives sit side by side. Thoth's prophetic stance doesn't demand we discard science. Rather, it invites a synthesis where empirical observation and symbolic interpretation converse. This is why so many modern reports about dogs seeing spirits or predicting events are dismissed by skeptics yet persist among witnesses. Different languages are being used to describe the same event. Addressing myths further, there is the seductive assumption that dogs are infallible seers. The truth is subtler. Canine perception is selective and shaped by context. A dog may alert to a storm barometer shift one day and ignore a human malaise the next. They are not oracles on a schedule. Thoth's warning is less about an inevitable chorus of prophecy and more about thresholds, certain moments when the membrane between states thins and dogs, by virtue of their attunement, become blunt instruments of revelation. These moments are often preceded by cultural and environmental stressors: rapid technological change, mass migrations, ecological collapse. When such pressures accumulate, the dog's role as sentinel intensifies, and human communities notice. There are also paradoxical ethical implications embedded in the prophecy. If dogs mirror the human shadow, then our treatment of them matters to the health of the collective psyche. Neglect, cruelty, and industrial separation do not simply harm animals, they blunt an ancient censor. Thoth's voice here shifts from prediction to prescription: restore right relationship, and the guardianship returns; abuse it, and the signal becomes muffled or distorted. Hidden in this is a practical spirituality. Ritualized care, attentive presence, and communal listening become forms of technology that keep the line between worlds workable. Finally, the prophecy contains an uncomfortable possibility: dogs might not be neutral. Some esoteric readings suggest that when thresholds open, forces that are not benevolent take interest. Dogs could then function as both warning and lure, drawing attention to a presence that demands reckoning. This darker reading explains folklore where dogs lead travelers astray or where a haunted hell precedes misfortune. Thoth's phrasing, careful and elliptical, allows for this ambiguity. The same sentinel that saves may also reveal what must be confronted. If Thoth's prophecy about dogs is truly unfolding in our age, then the most meaningful response is not to admire it from afar, but to step into it consciously. Ancient wisdom was rarely meant to remain in dusty scrolls. It was a living technology, woven into daily life so subtly that it became as natural as breathing. The key is not to wait for a single, dramatic sign, but to cultivate a continuous dialogue with the animal sentinels in our midst. The first and most essential practice is attentive presence. In a world that thrives on distraction, your undivided awareness is a rare and powerful offering. Choose a time each day, preferably early morning or deep evening, when the world is quieter, to sit with your dog without agenda. Remove all devices, all commands, and all attempts to make anything happen. Breathe deeply, letting your rhythm slow to match theirs. Notice the flick of an ear toward a sound you cannot hear, the way their nose seems to test the air for invisible currents, the stillness that overtakes them when they fix on something beyond your sight. Keep a small journal to record these sessions. Over weeks and months, you will begin to see patterns, subtle repetitions that speak to an ongoing awareness far beyond your own. The second practice draws on the dog's most ancient gift, scent. You can engage in a scent mapping ritual to learn how they interpret the world. Place 3 or 4 small pieces of cloth or paper in different rooms or outdoor spaces for an hour. One might be near a window, another near a doorway, another beside a still corner. Bring each cloth to your dog in turn, and observe their reaction, not just interest, but intensity, duration, and any physical change in posture or breath. Dogs read scent as we read script, with nuance, association, and sometimes urgency. By repeating this exercise, you can start to chart how changes in your environment, seasonal shifts, visiting neighbors, even subtle air quality changes, affect your dog's alertness. Another deeply revealing method is shared dream work. Before sleep, sit with your dog and softly set an intention aloud, something simple like, "If you see something tonight, wake me gently." Keep your journal by the bed. Some people have reported their dogs waking them in the middle of the night only for the human to experience vivid dreams, sudden insight, or even physical symptoms that needed attention. Others have found that these nocturnal interactions often coincide with changes in the weather, emotional tension in the household, or personal breakthroughs. Whether the connection is spiritual, biological, or both, the act of setting an intention and honoring the dog's response strengthens the subtle bond that the prophecy points toward. For those seeking to integrate this awareness into the fabric of their home, create a threshold altar. This is a small, symbolic space placed near your main entrance. It could hold a bowl of fresh water, a smooth river stone, a candle, and a small strip of cloth that your dog has touched. Refresh it weekly, and whenever your dog pauses at the doorway, whether to sniff, hesitate, or simply stand, ring a small bell or murmur a word of acknowledgement. Over time, you and your dog will begin to associate the threshold with an awareness of crossing between states, which was central to ancient conceptions of guardianship. If you live within a community, expand this practice outward through a listening circle. Invite neighbors and their dogs to meet once a month in a neutral space. Each person simply shares any unusual behavior they've noticed in their animals. No debate, no immediate conclusions, just a space for observation. When certain patterns appear in multiple households, dogs restless on the same night, avoiding the same street corner, howling at the same hour, it can indicate environmental shifts, social changes, or phenomena yet unseen. Historically, many villages relied on precisely this type of communal animal observation as a first warning system for storms, sickness, or even political unrest. The deeper purpose of these practices is not only to hear the dog's warnings but to refine your own perception. By synchronizing your attention to an animal that lives so vividly in the moment, you begin to recover the awareness your ancestors relied upon, a sensitivity to the smallest changes in air, sound, and unseen energy. Over time, this attunement becomes second nature. You will find yourself noticing patterns in the wind before a storm, sensing tension in a room before a word is spoken, and understanding the quiet language of pause, breath, and glance. In honoring this prophecy through practice, you are not merely using a dog's abilities. You are entering into a sacred reciprocity, restoring a relationship between species that has been central to human survival and spiritual growth since the first campfires were lit. And in that restored connection, the watcher and the watched become one, both standing at the threshold, listening for what approaches from the shadows. Thoth's prophecy about dogs was never meant to be a quaint tale, a curious footnote in the scrolls of esoteric history. It is a living directive, an ancient whisper meant for a future age, a time when the human senses would grow dull under the weight of noise and distraction, and when our survival, both physical and spiritual, would depend on remembering how to listen. That time is not centuries away. It is here. It is now. Across the world, stories are quietly surfacing, dogs pacing hours before earthquakes, howling in sync before sudden storms, lying beside their humans in moments of illness they had no way to detect. These accounts do not live in dusty archives, they come from neighborhoods, hospitals, farms, and city streets. Whether seen through the lens of biology or the lens of prophecy, they point to the same truth: dogs are reading the currents long before they break upon us. The question is whether we will pay attention before those currents swell into a tide we cannot turn. The role of the dog as watcher is not a passive one, and neither is ours as their companions. The prophecy places responsibility on us as much as it does on them. If they carry the shadow of man's soul, as Thoth described, then their well-being is a mirror of our own spiritual hygiene. A restless, anxious, or neglected dog may not only be reacting to its own environment, it may be reflecting the unrest we carry inside. This is the hidden reciprocity. When we tend to them, we tend to ourselves. When we ignore them, we risk blinding ourselves to the very signs meant to guide us. In this way, Thoth's words become less about predicting a singular event and more about describing a shift in relationship, a call to restore an ancient alliance between human and canine. It is an alliance of mutual vigilance, where each learns to read the other not with cold analysis, but with a deep, sustained presence. It is the reawakening of a language older than speech, one written in glances, pauses, and the rhythm of shared breath. Perhaps this is the real warning in the prophecy, that the doorway to the unseen does not swing open with grand ceremony, but with the quiet, unremarkable moments that pass between you and the dog who walks beside you. Each nudge of a nose, each stillness before the dark, each unprompted gaze into the distance may be part of a pattern, a signal not only of what approaches, but of who you are becoming in response to it. So the next time you feel the warm weight of a dog's head on your lap, or catch them staring into a space you cannot see, resist the urge to dismiss it. Instead, breathe, look with them, and allow yourself to feel the edges of a reality that has always been there. Thoth's prophecy is not about fear, it is about readiness. It is about walking with open eyes beside the sentinel who has been keeping watch for thousands of years, waiting for you to remember that you, too, are meant to see. And perhaps, when you learn to see together, you will realize that the prophecy was never about the future at all. It was about this very moment, the one in which you finally begin to listen.